Wonderful. Okay, well, welcome everybody. So today I'm joined by Flic Gabbay. Now, Flic is the managing partner of Transcript, and Transcript is a specialty pharma service. So today we're going to be discussing a little bit about Flic's background, how she got to where she is today, and some challenges that she faced along the way. So Flic, to kick us off, can you just tell me a little bit about your background, starting off with education?
Okay, so just to give a little bit about what I do today, I run an organisation that is essentially a sort of clinical development department for hire. It's a rather big clinical development department in the sense that it has 50 employees, most of whom are client facing. And over the last 12 years, we've actually supported about 250 companies, and by value about half of those are big pharma. So we do a bit of kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, in that we learn a lot from big pharma and we pass it on to our smaller clients. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I started to get here. I'm a pharmaceutical physician, and I'm actually vice president of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine as well at the moment, which I was very much involved in founding over 30 years ago. So I've been in pharma a long time.
Wow.
But I started when I left school. I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to go to college to do drama or whether to go to medical school. And it was my mother who persuaded me that I should do medicine, on the basis that if I had a medical degree, then as long as I went through the first 6-8 years or so, there would always be something I could go back to do my higher medical training, and I'd always have a job to go to. So she persuaded me that, and of course this was back in the late 60s, when actually people were still anxious that you might be without a job. So it was a really critical time after the war finished quite a while before, but still our parents were very influenced by the fact that you might end up without a career, which for boys was really important. For women, my mother, who unusually had worked all her career, she was a university lecturer, and but she was passionate about the fact that I must have a career as well. So that's how I started. And I went to medical school. I was always passionate. My favourite subjects, in spite of wanting to do drama, my favourite subjects at school were maths and chemistry. So when I got to medical school, I hadn't done any biology because I thought I was going to do something completely different until my mother persuaded me otherwise. So I had to do a biology course as part of my first year in university in medicine, as well as first year. And actually I really enjoyed it because I learned a lot. I did a lot of research. I always enjoyed research. I loved inventing things. My chemistry set was one of my favorite toys, and on occasion I nearly blew up one of the rooms in the house. So it wasn't entirely successful. I was banned from using it after a while. But then I went to medical school. I really enjoyed it. Whilst I was in medical school, I tried to invent a device that would keep a fallopian tube open, so that after you'd had if you had an ectopic pregnancy, you didn't get closed fallopian tubes and make you infertile. Of course, it never went anywhere, and I think the obstetrician who was my tutor at the time thought I was completely mad, but it struck me as being something you should be doing. And I went on being interested in that. I went to Cambridge to do obs and gynae. I originally qualified in Manchester, and whilst I was there, I was doing a clinical trial for what was May and Baker, which was part of Rome Palang. which obviously doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I was doing this trial to look at a prostaglandin that softened the cervix. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the year in obstetrics and gynecology, you have to take a year out to do something else. And I thought it would be really interesting to go and work in the industry to do research.
Yeah.
So went to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and they went, my goodness, what's that all about? But I was facing a research job in Cambridge in Addenbrooke's with a grant of £15,000 a year, or a job in Rhone-Poulenc with a budget of £300,000 a year to develop this drug. And I thought, do you know what? I think I'd rather take the bigger amount of money and learn about drug development. So I actually then went off to work for Rhone-Poulenc, Park Davis and Ono, who had a tripartite agreement to develop prostaglandins. And it took me to the States and to Japan, and it was really awe-inspiring to see how globally research can come together. And I think once I did that, I was hooked. And I noticed that amongst the people who come to work for us now, we have people who come from arts graduates who come and work in the office, and they find the whole pharmaceutical development piece really fascinating, and it is quite addictive, I think. I went on to work in Rhone-Poulenc and then Park Davis, who was one of our partners, and I did that for 11 years. And by the time I reached more senior echelons in Park Davis, I was on the board of UK and ERA, and I also was heading up the anti-infective role for antibiotics globally for Park Davis, which was in the golden era of development of new antibiotics that we use today. And obviously we have resistance to some of those now, but in the early 80s, they were relatively new antibiotics. So it was a very interesting time. And I also worked on a lot of other things. I was responsible for clinical research in Northern Europe, which actually for some reason included Portugal, South Africa, Australia. And so it was very interesting. And I think one of the most interesting things that I learned about drug development is something which relates to history and philosophy of science, which is something people might not understand so well, but you are living social construction of knowledge.
Yeah.
And it is about who publishes what. The pharmaceutical industry hardly publishes anything compared to academia because of the risk of loss of IP.
Yeah.
And yet it actually develops alongside. So looking at the different requirements societally of somebody in academia and somebody in pharma, and how a development finally gets to be used in practice, the acceptance of that in medical practice is very, very interesting. And I think as you become more and more experienced in pharmaceutical medicine development, that also becomes something very interesting, understanding how media influences what is taken forward in science, as well as the science itself. And that is a real, being in the pharmaceutical industry, you are living that philosophical social construction of knowledge, which I think is very, very interesting.
Wow.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say, is that kind of a key thing that pulls you in, that kind of keeps you curious? And
I think it does, and I think it does for a lot of people. They don't necessarily understand the academic concept of social construction of knowledge.
Yeah.
But what they read on the Twitter feed, on LinkedIn, and in the past in, you know, magazines that we would read like Scrip and so on, hugely influences where investments are made, what is taken forward and what is not taken forward, and the different statistical mechanisms we use to choose those things. And as many of the people who come into pharma come from really deep academic backgrounds, I think for them it's enormously rewarding to understand those sort of aspects of it. Absolutely. Because it is so very different from clinical practice and also from university, but definitely. Very rewarding.
Definitely. I'll let you go on, and then I've got a couple of questions just about you moving around in your career.
Okay, so I then was in Park Davis. I was on board. I was sent to the US to run the infectious disease piece for a year, but it was actually quite impossible for me for family reasons to stay in the US. So I came back to Europe, and there really wasn't a job for me. I was working for a US company. In order to be in the senior echelons, you had to be in the US. In the late 80s, US pharma was completely different from UK pharma. So there really wasn't a job for me in senior UK pharma. It was very differently managerially structured for many reasons. And I therefore thought, well, I could set up a company. So I set up a CRO. At the time, there was really only Covance, which was then Besseler, which was founded by Hein Besseler. And Dennis Gillings, of course, had started Quintiles, which was a largely database CRO then. And I thought, well, you know, if we could offer what we did for big pharma in terms of having physicians and bringing studies together, perhaps I could run a CRO. We ran the CRO, which was Gabbay Group, and it was run for 5 years, and we then sold it to PPD. And it was the first CRO that PPD bought outside of the US.
Wow.
And I stayed with them for a year, but I really, I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart. and you know, suddenly taking a hierarchical role within a very big organization again didn't necessarily meet my aspirations.
Exactly.
And so I then left and had a massive sort of failure in my career, if you call it a failure, but you know, you have to have some. I founded with some colleagues a pharmaceutical company, and the products that we licensed in to take through development, we were going to do late stage development. There were a huge number of mergers in the late 90s, and the license deals were no longer financially viable. So we just cut our losses, lost the money that we'd invested in the company and getting the deals done. And I moved to be a CEO of first one biotech and then another. And so it was completely different. And then I found myself dealing with venture capital companies and a completely different environment. But I think, you know, that's one of my big learnings we'll come to later, is that every so often you have to take a chance and fail.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I think after the second biotech was taken over by a different group of investors who I didn't get on with terribly well, I semi-retired actually. I decided I was exhausted. I needed to do something else.
I mean, I don't blame you after that career.
So it was So it was quite interesting, because then one of my colleagues, who was now in a company called Chiron, which is another biotech, but they had a antibiotic coming through that they'd licensed in from the US, and they needed a clinical team to register the antibiotic. And my colleague said to me, Flic, I don't have the management experience you have. Will you please come back and work alongside me as a consultant so we can get this drug registered and hire the right people, and you help me manage them, which I did. But in the meantime, the company was bought by Novartis, and quite a lot of the people in London in the biotech didn't want to go to Basel. So they said to me, would you consider setting up another company? And I went, well, by that time in 2006, you couldn't set up a CRO easily without an awful lot of investment. And I said, well, I don't think I'm going there. But we might set up a specialist consultancy that offers all the services that Big Pharma has lost in that mid-tier level of physicians and so on, which were currently provided then by armies of independent consultants.
Yeah.
And we thought if we could group people together and provide the infrastructure for those people, so they'd have the right medical writers, project managers, people to help them oversee clinical trials, we could offer something that other people seem to very much need and other people couldn't offer. And that's what Transcript has done. It's in the public domain. We've just done a significant investment with a private equity house. And I have been the managing partner throughout that, but I've got a fantastic team of we've got, I think, about 12 physicians who are employees now, and we've had an awful lot in the past who've now retired over 12 years, you can imagine. And it's been a really interesting place. And now we are bringing people into this, not as CRO style thing to give them medical monitoring, but to teach people joining pharma drug development, which is really exciting for me, because I'm able to bring people into our environment where we've got at any one time 30 or 40 clients, and I can put them into drug development positions, and they are learning. So what I'm doing now is to be able to give back, which is, as well as obviously all the challenges of running a business, but it's that rewarding. Is particularly rewarding. Yes. So that really is my journey.
Wow, that's amazing. And do you know what really stands out to me and intrigues me is just how much you moved around and you traveled in your kind of early career. And I kind of wonder, from a perspective of when you were a younger employee, do you think that really benefited you when trying to go to that next job or meeting that next employer? And then also, I guess, as an employer now, would you recommend moving around early career as something to do?
Yes, well, actually, I didn't move around a huge amount. What I did was, once I joined pharma, of course, I did move from Rome Polite to Park Davis, and that was 11 years, which is a long time in pharma. So that period, and I gradually learned it. The problem now is that there are very few jobs in big pharma for people to go and spend 10 years learning their trade. So we have to offer other places that they can go to. And the other handicap of doing what I did is that though you learn the skills of drug development, you don't learn much except the drugs that company develops. I was very fortunate in Park Davis, which is now part of Pfizer, of course, that they had drugs in many different therapeutic areas, and at the level I was involved in most of those programs, whether they be oncology, antibiotics, epilepsy, right across the board. But for most people, they are locked into a particular therapeutic area.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, I think there are some opportunities for organizations like ourselves, where we work in all different therapeutic areas, but we are a service company, but we do work very, very closely with biotechs. I think if you are in a biotech or a pharma, unless you're in a big pharma with many therapeutic areas and different things to do, you are, to some extent, you do actually have to move around a bit in order to get that experience. I think we'd love to say that, if we could, if I could aspire to having a business that had those things there, that actually being able to bring people through in the way that Big Pharma did, that would be wonderful. I don't know whether we ever will, but it's an aspiration.
Absolutely. Wonderful. That's brilliant. So my next kind of question is, we touched on it a little bit, what kind of challenges did you face along the way?
Well, I think one has to bear in mind that the world was a very different place in the 80s. When I was on the board of UK and ERA of Park Davis, of the 200 people who were at board level or managerial level in Park Davis worldwide, there were only 2 women.
Gosh, of course, yeah.
So this is sort of mid to late 1980s, and the world has changed dramatically since then, which just shows how pressure and social pressure does work in that respect. But that was a huge challenge in the sense that lots of little things like if you're in a meeting room and the meeting room is full of men, they have much deeper voices than women. And if it's a room with 40 people in it, if a woman has to project her voice, then it sounds like you're screeching or you're, whereas if a man makes his big, deep, that's just how he sounds. And that is quite challenging. So one of the things that I did when I organized meetings was that I used to insist on having microphones when there was 30 or 40 people, which would allow you to get round the things. And then there were all sorts of other things, like one of my huge things about why I learned so much is that, especially in American companies, people are promoted they were promoted very quickly. And I found that frequently I was overlooked. So I'd be doing a good job. And the first time this happened to me, I went to my boss and said, why has so-and-so been promoted to this job and I haven't? And the response was, well, you're so good at doing the job you do that we daren't promote you out of it because there's nobody to replace you.
Gosh.
And that's kind of, well, why don't you create me a title or something to recognize that?
Yeah, of course.
And I was quite distressed by that. And then I realized that many of the men, I worked for 9 people in 8 years. And most of them left the company because they failed, because they were promoted above me. And I really thought one day, hang on a minute, I'm doing really well here because I'm just putting my head down, getting on with the job and learning the job as I go. And actually, it was a huge benefit to me in the end, the fact that I travelled up the organisation slower than my male colleagues.
Absolutely. I guess you kind of watch and learn then, and you kind of pick up on, I guess, bad habits, bad traits, and that's quite a good experience in itself.
all of us make mistakes, but my mistakes weren't so visible because I was not head of department.
Of course.
So, you know, you have to make mistakes to learn. And that was one of the wonderful things that I thought about the US was they give you enough rope to make mistakes. And they recognize mistakes are an important part of the learning process. And that at the time in the UK wasn't the case. And I do think making mistakes is a very important part, and you must, as a manager, learn to tolerate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what kind of things in your career then, could you give me maybe one experience that you're grateful for, maybe something somebody has said or something that happened that stuck with you?
Yes, so what is I think, yes, I think actually it was there was a lot around the founding of the faculty. They say that you know, a lot of people say that my career has developed because I found a good mentor. I don't think I ever really, I mean, especially working for all those people in a period of 8 years, I don't really have a mentor. They were there one day and then they went. But actually what I did discover was that I could very much build my career by understanding what was going on around me and making the career and professional infrastructure around me a better place. And that I think I had my ex-husband was an academic in history and philosophy of science and a colleague of Roy Porter's, and I learned from that to look around me and see what was influencing the world. And what it struck me was that pharmaceutical physicians had no recognition in medicine, even though we were writing prescriptions for the whole country rather than for individuals. That was not recognized. People kept saying to me, "Why did you leave medicine?" Well, I didn't. I probably got a more responsible role. And that's a bit like saying that Chris Whitty and all the public health physicians left medicine, you know? It's not the case. But I think I realized when I looked around that actually I could probably understand the importance of professional infrastructure for my own career, and it would benefit my colleagues as well. And I think having not had a sort of serious mentor to bring me to the forefront, to actually stand up and say, this is an issue, it's an issue we need to solve. We don't have professional infrastructure and professional training, and it's leading to the average stay of a pharmaceutical physician in a job of 3 years or less, because they're not learning, they don't have any support, there's very little training, and there was good training at that time in the UK that wasn't available elsewhere. And I can't claim that I introduced professional training at all to pharmaceutical physicians, because there were many people before me who had driven that for the diploma of pharmaceutical medicine. But I think what I really felt was we had to establish that within the Royal College system, and that changed my career, because it changed it in 2 ways. One was that I was clearly a bit of a feisty woman who had a view about things, which meant that I was pretty much unemployable in British big pharma. I'm sure. Number 2, it actually established me as somebody who could lead companies. And so, you know, albeit the first companies that I led were service companies, it stood me in great stead in terms of my confidence to be able to go straight into biotech and understand how to develop. And I have to say, I thank Park Davis hugely for giving me massive of training from places like Harvard, short courses and things in the States on management training, which has been invaluable to me over the years.
That's amazing. That really is brilliant. So if you could maybe give some advice to a young Flic, what would you say?
I would say, if you're, for all people who join pharma, you know, whether you're, whatever your gender, your creed, anything, you know, wherever you come from, there are opportunities for you. You must not allow yourself to feel unempowered, because that's quite a slippery slope. You know, you are the person who will make the difference going forward. And actually a huge amount of what I have, funnily enough, it's not an upward mentor. Very often the people who have changed my life are people who worked for me, who went on to do great things, who've lifted my career, which has been really, so it's been kind of almost like an inverted thing. And so I think go in there, there will be huge frustrations. Don't be afraid to work hard. Keep your eyes and your ears open around the place for opportunities, and do continue to learn and understand. And I do think, don't underestimate the importance of understanding how knowledge is built. You know, look at how, try and understand how the different factions of academia, pharma, public health, epidemiology, all those things come together. And I think there are enormous opportunities in pharma and in the regulatory agencies, many of whom who work there are pharmaceutical physicians, or are, you don't need to be a physician now. Many of these positions in pharma are taken by non-physicians. But I think there is huge opportunity out there. And as I say, I hope we're contributing to it in Transcript going forward.
Absolutely. Well, wonderful. And thank you so much for joining me today to share your personal career journey and the kind of your experiences, the challenges you face, and just some really inspiring advice. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's for me, it's been a very rewarding thing. And actually, one of the things that stands tribute to many people in pharma is very few people who join pharma ever retire properly. In other professions, you find people who just can't wait. And many of my medical colleagues and my friends couldn't wait till they got to their 55th or 60th birthday to take early retirement. None of us seem to do that. We all claim to do it, and then it never gets there.
I have to say, I have noticed. Very funny. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are delighted to have Transcript to sponsor our first Building Life Science Adventures conference. So I hope that everybody who watched the interview today enjoys the conference and enjoys watching this.
Thank you.